The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. We're really pleased to have Senator Amanda Chase with us today. Thank you for being here.
Well, Woody, thanks for having me today.
Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the awards you have received for your service last year in the General Assembly. I believe the Treasurers Association of Virginia awarded you Legislator of the Year. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You received the highest Tea Party score of any member, and the American Conservative Union also recognized you, along with the Virginia Assembly of Independent Baptists for their Patriots Award. Congratulations on all of those.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, what's interesting about that is that you are co-founder of the Transparency Caucus, and your colleague on the House side is probably one of the more liberal and progressive members of the House of Delegates, Mark Levine. How do you two get along?
Well, first of all, you have to have a great sense of humor, which we do, and I think the wonderful part of this is that despite your political stripes, you can still find commonality and we both agree on transparency, for instance. We both feel like governors should be of the people, by the people. And so we even both have call-in radio shows that our constituents can call in as a town hall every week. So that's one thing that we do agree on.
So tell us a little bit more about the Transparency Caucus, what it did last session and what it continues to do now.
Right. So the Transparency Caucus is specifically designed basically where the members would record their proceedings of each of the bills that they present in subcommittee, where, as you were saying earlier, a lot of the work is done, also in committee, and then of course it's videoed on the floor. But the whole goal is to have transparency. We know that many of our constituents have to work for a living, and they would love to come and lobby us at the General Assembly or follow a particular bill that's important to them. They may not be able to do that because of time constraints and having to work. So anything that we can do to make our government more accessible and transparent, that's what the focus of the Transparency Caucus is going to do. So last session, it was just defining what our caucus represented, which is basically filming our Transparency Caucus, our bills
Sure.
that we're patroning and getting support for those. People can see how we present the bills. These are not just our bills, they are our constituencies' bills, and so we feel a deep sense of responsibility to them and reporting back on how we performed on those bills and how they performed in committee.
And what's interesting is there is a dichotomy between the State Senate and the House of Delegates in that the rules of the State Senate at least require votes at the subcommittee level.
Absolutely. And so Mark has a little bit of work to do on that part, but we are certainly at this point trying to build our membership. So folks can reach out to their representative, their state senators, their members in the House, and say, are you a part of the Transparency Caucus? And one of the things that we would like to do in the new building, as many people know, coming up in the next year or so, we're going to have a new building. We've had some issues with the old one, and we'll get a new one. And so we want to make sure, as a part of the infrastructure in that building, that they have the ability to tape and record and make it accessible to the public. And
also understand there's another independent organization, Progress Virginia, which is attempting to supplement your efforts.
Right. And, I think it's good for us as legislators to video our own proceedings and take that responsibility, but certainly, outside third-party agencies should, they're public meetings, and we represent the people, and as long as they have pure motives, in doing that, anything that's going to help our constituency and help us to be more transparent, I welcome that. And
you mentioned your radio town hall show. You have about 200,000 constituents, I believe,
Correct.
And this is one way of keeping in contact with them, sharing your views, and more importantly, they sharing their views with you.
Absolutely. You know, one of the two things that I ran on, Woody, was that I wanted to be transparent and that I wanted to be accessible. And I really want to thank the folks at WNTW Radio The Answer, because this is a public service. I'm not paid to do this, and you know, there's no money exchange or anything involved. It really is their free goodwill and wanting to reach out to constituents, hear their concerns. Every week, it's every Thursday from 4 to 5, and we record those and make those available on my website. And we encourage folks to participate in that process. We have several experts or guest speakers each week. And our goal is not to be political, but really to address issues that are important to the constituents. So it's not a typical radio show. It's more educational in nature. I think kind of similar to what you have. It's we don't want a lot of strife or anything on there. People don't want to hear that. I mean, we really use this venue as a way to have a weekly town hall and stay in touch with constituents.
Well, tell us a little bit about your district, the demographics, major employers, how the economy is going.
Sure. So we have all of Amelia, all of Colonial Heights, and I have most of Chesterfield in my district. Chesterfield is actually split amongst Senator Dance and also Senator Glenn Sturdivant as well. And so we work really well together. Our offices are right next to each other. And, you know, we're really encouraged by the last quarter. Earnings were up, I believe it was 8.5%. As a whole, you know, my concern all along has been, you know, Forbes has rated Virginia as being number 6. We used to be number 1. There are also CNBC has us as number 13, whereas we used to be number 1.
Now, this is in terms of a business-friendly environment.
That's exactly right. And there's several different criteria that they take into account. You know, the cost of business, what are the taxes, what about the regulation? Do you have the ability to hire people that are qualified and able to do the jobs that are available? So there's probably about 20 different criteria that they take a look at, and I'm a little bit competitive, but I want Virginia to be at number 1, and so and I know a lot of members in the General Assembly do as well. A couple of the bills that I introduced this morning, there are 3 of them. One of those would reform the way we calculate the B-poll tax. Or
that's the business professional occupational license tax.
Yes, that's a mouthful. Yes. But I call it the gross receipts tax because it's gross. First of all, it is a gross tax. If you're a business owner and you pay the B-poll tax, or what I like to refer it to as the gross receipts tax, I just don't think it's the proper way for us to calculate the tax on that. Because
so whether a business is actually making money or not, they are still taxed on that gross revenue.
That's exactly right. And so we need to do things that don't penalize our businesses. We need to implement policy that's going to encourage small business. And why do we want to encourage small business? Because ultimately everybody wants a job. As Virginians, we want to provide for our families. And so that's anytime that we're looking at tax reform, we're looking at ways to not only have a job, if you want to be a job producer and have a small business, employ other people, the legislation that I introduced this morning would do all of those things.
Now, you mentioned some other pieces of business-friendly legislation. Let's talk about those.
Absolutely. So one of those would be if you're a small business owner and you're starting a new business, in the first 5 years, we hope that you can make at least $100,000 profit. If not, then we want to give you a taxable income credit for your personal income tax, because ultimately at the end of the day, it's really challenging. My husband and I've had a number of businesses, and the first 5 years are the most critical. So in addition to reforming B-poll, in addition to giving that tax credit, you know, we also want to look at bringing corporations to Virginia that may be looking along the East Coast and thinking of relocating their headquarters. And so our current corporate income tax rate in Virginia is 6%. One of our competitors, North Carolina, is currently at 3% as of this year.
That big of a difference.
And so my proposal was, let's go at 2.5%. And although there is a huge fiscal impact to Virginia, I do feel like we need to at least take a look. One of my suggestions was, let's form a commission. And let's look at our tax reform as a whole instead of individual pieces of legislation. And so hopefully Senate Finance today agrees with that.
Well, that's great. That's an interesting proposition, that credit for small businesses, because many small businesses are taxed twice, the business once and then the individual
That's right.
twice. So that's the reason for that, I take it.
Absolutely. You're exactly right. So anything we can do to help small business, I'm all for it.
Good. Now, what about just diversifying the economy in your district and around the Commonwealth, because we are still significantly dependent upon the federal government?
Yes, we are. And as you know, Woody, with the sequestration that took place several years ago, and we're still feeling the effects of that. And just for those who are not familiar with sequestration, the federal government employs quite a few of our Virginians, and we're so appreciative of our veterans and all they do for us. In fact, we're the #1 employer of veterans here in Virginia. And so as the federal government was cutting those funds, it affected our economy in general. DOD suppliers, those types of things. It has a ripple effect through our economy. So we are having to figure out creative ways to replace that income. Now, I'm hopeful that under the new administration that we would reinforce, re-solidify our military. And I certainly feel like President Trump is heading in that direction. So maybe that will reverse itself. But I still think, from a finance standpoint, my background is finance, and one of the things that we always talk about is diversify, diversify, diversify. Never put all your eggs in the same basket. So I think even if we do build up our military once again, that we still should be looking at bringing other industry to Virginia, which I think by lowering that corporate income tax, it would certainly help bring corporations and have them headquarter here. You
mentioned the Forbes recognition. Part of that also, as I recall, is based upon the bond rating that the Commonwealth still has. It's still AAA, as I recall, and we want to maintain that, do we not?
Absolutely. We absolutely do. And a lot of people don't realize this, but our law states that we have to have a balanced budget.
Unlike the federal government.
That's right. So we do have to balance the budget, and so anytime we make proposals, we have to show budget amendments to our proposed budget, as we presented our budget and passed it last year. Now we come back, and anytime that we suggest or come up with an initiative, we have to show where that money's going to come from, and so that can be a challenge.
Talk to us about transportation issues in your district. Central Virginia does not get much attention. It's either Hampton Roads or it's Northern Virginia. There have to be needs here as well.
Well, they several years ago, there was a bill that was passed. Now, this was before I was there, the Transportation Act Smart Scale, which I think was actually a really good initiative. And, I sit on transportation, and one of the effects of that bill is it really does push a lot of those decisions down to the locality, so that the Board of Supervisors put in their request. And then we actually have they work with DMV, their local DMV, not DMV, VDOT.
Right.
And so as a result of that, they have metrics in place which calculate the cost and the return. And then once all of those proposals are submitted, they're ranked, and we take a look at how much money we have in the budget, and we take a look at the request, and then they're prioritized. And then they're able to, if they see that they have a high cost, then the next year they can come in and recalculate their plan and submit it again with hopefully a lower cost associated with it, or benefit associated with it.
So some of those objective factors, for example, relate to mitigation of congestion, for example, safety, economic development of rural areas, those kinds of things?
Right. Well, I think most of the funds this past year were sent to the I-66 Northern Virginia projects. So what we're going to see this year is more of that money going to the localities, more projects being done. You'll see a lot more projects being done throughout Virginia instead of just Northern Virginia.
Now, you also serve on the Privileges and Elections Committee, and I know you have some election reform initiatives there.
Absolutely, and I love serving on Privileges and Elections, especially in a federal election year.
Yes.
It was an exciting year. Well, one of the things that we want to ensure is the integrity of the process, and I work very closely. Senator Vogel is the chair of that committee in the Senate. We actually had a joint meeting with the House and the Senate right before the election to hear concerns that many of our registrars expressed. And that was that VERIS continued to go down, which is the IT system that they use to register people to vote and vote absentee. And so there was a concern that maybe we wouldn't be ready on election day because they couldn't get their work done. The system kept crashing. And so we stepped in and we worked together to make sure that election day was as successful as it could be. You know, we had to print the poll books, and kudos to our registrars who do a fantastic job in trying to meet the need with the resources they have. But so a couple of the laws that we put in place, we worked with the registrars on to decrease the amount of potential fraud that we can see in an election year. And one of those ideas that several of us have put forward is presenting an identification. Right now we have the photo ID law. As you appear and actually go to your polling place, you have to present a valid picture ID. But what about those who vote absentee? Currently you don't have that. And so what we're proposing to do is that you make a copy of your valid ID just as if you were going in person.
I see.
And submit that. So Delegate Buddy Fowler has put that in on the House side, and I put that bill in on the Senate side. And I just think anything is better than what we have now, which is nothing. We need to close these loopholes for fraud. One of the other things that we're talking about is, and me specifically, has to do with electoral college reform. I completely support the electoral college. I think it's a good mechanism that's been in place, but I think we should look at how we reform that. We have never had in the history of the U.S. a president who won 100% of the popular vote.
Right.
Yet they receive 100% of the electoral college vote. And so what happens after a presidential year, people are disgruntled. I mean, they feel like their vote didn't count. So I feel like this will help the citizens to feel like their vote counts. It's a split vote so that the electoral college vote is more representative of what some would say is the popular vote.
So it'll be proportional.
Absolutely. So everybody feels like their vote is heard. And this is not something new that's been introduced. We've had Democrats and Republicans alike to introduce this bill. And I just think we're still asking our constituents to let us know how they feel about the bill. But I do feel like it's more representative. The reform is more representative of the Virginians at large. Many times people complain and they say, how come Northern Virginia determines what the rest of the state has to do? And this helps to take care of that problem.
Now, what about absentee voting that you mentioned? Any discussions or dialogue around liberalizing absentee voting? There are a number of exemptions that exist already. What about more?
Well, I think the more you open it up, the more you open it up to fraud, quite honestly. I think that we need to not pick winners and losers, but be consistent with our policy, no matter who you are, across the board, and make it fair for everybody.
Now, what about redistricting? That's always a subject around here. There are calls for independent commissions to determine the boundaries of districts, not only on the state level, but at the congressional level. I believe Delegate Landis has a bill in this session that would maintain the authority of the General Assembly to draw those lines, but to make it more transparent, set up some objective criteria for determining those boundaries. Yes,
I completely agree. I mean, whenever you take a look at a legislative district, I mean, in my district, for instance, it's gerrymandered, and I think it disenfranchises the people that we represent. It's ideal to have similar communities that have similar interests together in having their representative to address those issues.
And unfortunately, there's been a lot of litigation that's cost the state significant amounts of money. There's a case pending yet before the U.S. Supreme Court that may have an impact at the at the state level, actually.
Right, absolutely. And I know one that's the freshest and most close to home right now in the Senate had to do with a redrawing of the congressional districts for the 4th District. And so, we saw what was once a Republican district with Congressman Randy Forbes is now
Right.
more of a Democratic leaning, and so we have, used to be Senator McEachin, now
Right.
Congressman McEachin, in that seat. So, you know, I think that we need the best practice, the best process in place that's going to be fair and representative of all people. And I do not encourage gerrymandering. I think that needs to be in the criteria whenever we are drawing the lines, that there needs to be specific definitions of what is allowed and what is not allowed. But
And I think Democrats and Republicans alike agree the system
Yes.
needs to be reformed because both parties, frankly, have taken advantage of each other
You're right.
when they
Absolutely.
were in power. You know,
You're
so
right.
education. I know that's an important area for you and your constituents. How are your local school districts doing?
Well, first of all, I think we have one of the best school boards that we ever have. We work very well together. I know right now the emphasis is on our teachers right now. We want to give our teachers a raise. We have no money right now, but we're still trying to find a raise for them. And that's really in our budget, the priority for our state workers, for our teachers, to find a raise. And then also look at SOL reform. Our teachers.
Standards of learning.
Standards of learning,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
exactly right. And you know, I come from a line of teachers, and you know, my mom was a teacher, my aunt was a teacher, and they just want to teach. They don't want to, our kids are tested to death. So we need to figure out reform that basically allows us to test to ensure that individually our kids are learning and that they're progressing from beginning of the year to the end of the year, but they're not overly tested. And then give our teachers the opportunity to teach. Right now they're having to teach to an SOL test, and we're seeing that. Our kids they don't have the problem-solving abilities that they would have if we would let our teachers teach.
Yeah, apparently I've heard that a lot of these students, especially the young ones, are completely stressed out by the fact that they have to take these exams. I understand, however, that part of those reforms are being implemented now. The tests have been reduced,
Yes.
the number of them.
Just recently. And you know, I have 4 kids that are currently in public school. I have 1 in college and 3 currently in our public school systems. And it's a partnership that we have to have with our teachers. We have to have that conversation so that we continue to support our teachers, support our public schools, and make sure they're the best that they possibly can be, and that we're not continually putting unfunded mandates on them. So,
And I think there have been a lot of state employees around the General Assembly the last 2 days. There have been long lines outside. I think a lot of them were teachers, but other state employees, especially public safety employees, are really disappointed in the fact that they're not going to get raises. A lot of them are leaving.
Right.
For example, the state police
Oh,
to
that's
local jurisdictions, going to other states. How are we going to deal with that?
well, we need to put that in our actual budget. You know, the constituents in my district, they don't want to see us to raise fees for any reason, but you know, that's a core function of government. Our state police do a fantastic job, and I was actually there visiting with several other members of our delegation in Chesterfield, because the state police headquarters is right on the edge of our district. And these are the cream of the crop, good quality people that just want to do their job. And you have wage compression issues where entry-level folks are making the same as people who've been there decades, and that's not right. And as you said, they're going to other localities so that they can support their families and make a better living. And so what happens is that we have to spend a lot of money retraining these officers who've had years of experience. So we're losing out at the state level. We have to fix the problem, and I think that we need to really take a serious look at prioritizing where we're spending our general funds.
Now, we had one of your colleagues down here last week, Senator Ryan McDougal, and he talked about an exciting thing that his very young daughter is going through. She's learning how to computer code at the elementary level. So that's something very exciting. The governor also mentioned in his remarks the opportunities that now exist for people with certifications, high school students, to get high-paying jobs in the cybersecurity arena.
Oh, absolutely. Cybersecurity is a huge one. And but one of the things that I'm encouraged by is that you see the General Assembly working with our educators And working with our businesses, we want to make sure when kids are graduating from high school that they either have the skills that they need to go and get gainful employment, or that they're ready to go to college, and that they, if they go to a community college, is that going to transfer to a higher, learning university if they desire to transfer? I mean, it's like we were talking earlier with the Virginia tax reform. I mean, we need to look at education as a whole, and we did pass legislation that would totally revamp and revise high school to make sure that what kids are learning is relevant. Sometimes we find that our educational system is not keeping up with the technical skills that they need to get gainful employment in the area they live.
In that regard, how important is the community college in your district?
Well, I know my son will be going there next year, so it's very important to me. Community colleges play a very huge role. The cost of education, as a mom of four, my husband and I have 4 kids, as I mentioned earlier, and they're all within 6 years. So we have one daughter that attends JMU, and we have a son that's getting ready to start a community college next year. And so it just provides options for our kids. We need to make sure that higher education is affordable for all kids, and I think community colleges is a great way to make that happen.
So even though the initiative advanced a few years ago about science, technology, engineering, math, and health are very important,
Yes.
there's some kids who don't need or don't want to or can't afford to go to our institutions of higher learning, so that junior college is critical.
Absolutely. And some kids, honestly, they don't know what they want to do just yet, and so it gives them an opportunity at a lower cost to figure out what they want to do, and maybe get those early requirements out, those general education studies out of the way. But I think it's great to have options for our kids.
Veterans in your district, very important. Talk to us about them.
Well, Delegate Kirk Cox has done a fantastic job. He's one of the colleagues in my area that has really done an exceptional job. So I'm just going to call him out on that for a second, because I really admire him. And I've actually co-patroned some bills with him to get veteran care centers here in Virginia. Maryland has 5. We currently in Virginia only have 2, so I co-patroned a bill with him to reach out to our veterans. We also need to be looking at job reentry. I know that we have programs in Virginia. I'm trying to remember the name of it right now, but it incentivizes companies in Virginia to hire our
Virginia
veterans.
values veterans.
Yes,
and we're going to have to leave it at that.
Okay, good.
Thank you for being here, Senator Amanda Chase.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.
Mm-hmm.